Welcome back, brothers and sisters. Today I want to share all my tips and tricks I'm using to dominate Space Marine 2's Ruthless difficulty. That way you can get to the power fantasy that I'm rocking right now. It is doable, but takes some understanding of the game's mechanics and how they regularly choose not to work. That way you can play around them. Maxing out all the classes and weapons is a big part of this, but there's a way to get there before that. And all 6 of my class guides will be getting posted tomorrow with all of their text guides that will always be updated in my Discord first. So everything you need is going to be linked down below. But for now, we're lighting this off with keywords because this is where your entire power fantasy comes from for every weapon sub a Melt-A-Gun. And if you want to take full advantage of melee, it's very important to understand the difference between block, balanced, and parry. When you use a block weapon, you can't parry at all, and just blocking attacks does not give you any consistent openings, and once it's overwhelmed, you just get cooked. This is the key thing that makes melee feel terrible, which leaves you 2 viable options, balanced and fencing. Both of these can parry, and when you parry, the enemy will get CC'd to be open to a gun strike. The parry itself will also knock back like every enemy around you, and kill the main target if it's a Minoris enemy. Gun strikes will also CC things in front of you, but using a gun strike needs to be well timed or you're just going to get melted if there's anything behind you. So always make sure you reposition before you gun strike so you don't take any back shots. You want to make sure you're always in the position to be giving back shots. That's the most important part of the entire game. So when we use a balanced weapon, we can parry and block, and when you miss the parry, it will usually default into a block for a second. So when you're learning the game, this is okay, and most of the starter weapons are like this. But there's also a couple of breakpoints based on the weapon that you pick, and the balanced versions of the weapons usually have the best overall stat line. But when you get into the fencing version of a weapon, you always have to sacrifice something and the ability to block altogether. The trade-off is that your parry window is insanely forgiving and lets you become an insane duelist even in a horde, and stops you from taking a lot of needless damage. It also lets you consistently get out of situations that would overwhelm a balanced weapon after you just start practicing with it. And a tip for getting perfect dodges and parries is to listen for the audio cue on the blue and orange circles. It makes a ticking noise, and the third tick is when you usually want to dodge. Glyph effects for AoEs on the ground are a little bit different because for some reason they're a little bit larger than they appear, but again, the most important thing is to just make sure that you don't take any weapons that say block. And every melee weapon with this keyword should just be researched with Armory data, that way you don't have to suffer through it. If you need a guide on the most efficient way to level all the weapons and characters while collecting a ton of Armory data, I already have a video posted for that, and it's the first link down below. And when we start talking about ranged weapons, they also have a different type of keywords for power fantasy that drastically changes the way some of the guns play, and the most noticeable example is any kind of AoE or the bolter penetration perk. Originally, I thought this would just go through one target, but it makes them so forgiving that it essentially makes them explosive piercing and just lets you mow down hordes of enemies after you get it, even on something like the heavy bolter, which is being insanely slept on right now because once you max it out, it completely annihilates every enemy. Even when you get it just to green and unlock the cleave perk, it makes a massive difference in the way that the gun feels. And with the heavy bolter, after you max it out, you get that 30% damage increase on top of that. It feels like what you'd imagine a heavy bolter would be. You just get to blast off even on Ruthless and basically ignore everything, but it feels terrible until you get it maxed out. That 4 accuracy and 9 damage with all the scaling turns it into a completely different weapon. So you can make anything work. There is a clear gap between some weapons, like again, like the multi-melta versus the heavy bolter is going to be a completely different power fantasy. But if you really enjoy a weapon, maxing it out will usually make it okay. And if you're playing a class like Tactical, it even has the cleave passive, and it really rounds out the early game grind on a lot of the bolt guns. The main point of this is you need to play around with different builds and find things that work and don't work in real situations. Just quickly testing off spawn, you can see like spread talents basically do nothing on the heavy bolter, so it's just going to be a waste. And when you're doing your own build, just make sure your class weapons and talents just all synergize together and make sense. Now we'll talk about how to upgrade your weapons efficiently, and if you've been doing a farm on mission 1, 3, or 6, you will usually get 2 armory data per mission, and it just lets you spam unlock everything the second you hit a new tier, so you don't even have to grind for the perks. But if you're starved, just try and get rid of that worst variant of the weapon so you can just enjoy the game more, because you can get over that like early hump of the game feeling bad to play, then you do get rewarded with a power fantasy on every single character. But as you progress into Ruthless difficulty, you have to change the way you play quite a bit. The way the difficulty slider increases is HP, accuracy, and damage for the enemies. It also puts more of a spawn weight on elite enemies than chaff enemies, which is a little weird, but going into tier 4 with fully perked out weapons is what it's scaled around. So everything starts to feel really bad if you go in with the wrong build or your weapons aren't maxed out. And that's where the bullet sponge difficulty slider comes from. It also has me a little bit worried about when tier 5 is going to come out for this game, because tier 4 used to have friendly fire on an earlier build, and if we don't get a new tier of weapon to tier into tier 5 with, then I think we will really see that bullet sponginess become an actual problem unless they stop scaling the enemies up. But one other thing is spawn seeds per mission are also extremely inconsistent, and sometimes you'll see a massive amount of enemies, like there's just things everywhere. But sometimes it's also empty. It's just weird. So if you do want to fight stuff consistently, I really recommend blasting off on mission 1. The end always has at least a big horde to blast off on. Now, after posting my last video, I saw a couple people saying that rolling is stupid and that they would never do it. And I agree. Everybody agrees that rolling is stupid on a Primera Space Marine to avoid all damage. And it looks ridiculous. But the devs decided to make our armor out of paper and give every ranged enemy guns that can punch a hole in the sun. And for some reason, they can also shoot twice. So using your droidica organ isn't something you really have a choice in, it's something stupid that you're forced to do on Ruthless. Will they ever change this? I have no idea, but for some reason, every PvE game decided not to playtest their hardest difficulties range units. Each enemy is also in a category, so if you want to breakpoint your weapon, sometimes a Majora's like percentage damage is all you need to one-shot something like a Tyranid Warrior. So those enemies are broken down into 4 categories, and the most important thing to take everything down, more than breakpoints, more than weapons, more than builds, is to try and make some friends to play with. Matchmaking is cooked, so you end up loading in solo a lot of the time after the last update, and joining literally any community Discord. I mean, anybody's. And trying to find people to play with that want to just progress and blast with some buddies is just your best option no matter what. I always try to promote people to play together in my community and just take anyone from chat when I'm streaming so that we can just go have fun and more people can get used to playing with each other. And I really think that your overall experience and perspective completely changes when you just finally get to do the cool thing together.
Jesus. Yeah.
Let me get your ult back up.
Hell yeah.
Now, contested HP regenerates in a very interesting way. It's based off damage and multi-target damage, so regenning HP is really easy with things like the multi-melta and the plasma pistol, but it's also really easy to regen that contested HP with something like a gunstrike because it does so much damage. So sometimes taking one hit to start your contested HP bar, then maxing your HP out with a methodical shot is the best way to lock in. The other way to reset HP exclusively for heavy and bulwark with health increases is to talk to the loadout box, but the other thing the holy box can do is to reset your ultimate and ammo. So if you're near one and there's a little bit of a problem, you can just spam reset. But probably the most important thing over anything else in all these PvE games is target priority. Removing anything that can shoot at you first in this game is the number one thing you can go for. During a boss fight, during anything. Anything that can shoot at you needs to be removed pretty much instantly because it's going to rip all of your HP off. And honestly, that hasn't really changed in any PvE game. So now just for a couple of quick tips, just use your resources regularly and often. I see so many people not toss a grenade the entire game or hold their ultimate for that perfect moment and just wait for situations that might not ever happen. It's a complete waste. And honestly, every time there's a big wave coming at you, every time you see a lot of enemies, just pop everything. Who cares? You don't need to use all your grenades. You don't need to use every ultimate, but that helps you stay healthy. That helps you progress the mission a lot easier, and resources are very abundant. Your ultimates come back off cooldown. So break all the boxes on the map. Be a little more aggressive, and just don't be scared to go crazy and have fun. And as you play more and more, you'll be getting a lot of this resource called requisition. It caps at 990, so if you aren't unlocking a new weapon, just dump it into cosmetics. That way you can completionist the game and start posting the best drip, because at its core, customization is what Warhammer is all about. I was also thinking of some PvP tips, but that's just more practice and learning the maps than anything, because the grind path is pretty simple. Level up, get weapon, kill player, usually try and get the grenades and pop off, but most importantly, the biggest tip, the main thing that you've probably heard 5 or 6 times this video, is have fun your way. Don't let anybody else tell you how to have fun. I told you how I have fun, and hopefully that helps, gives you ideas. But don't let anybody else tell you how you should play the game, how you should have fun. Bypassing the grinds that make the game less fun for me is how I do it. Bridging the gap for people who don't have all the time in the world to play games all day to get to the end game and have fun with their friends is what I like to do. And that's what my community is usually all about. And now that I have most of the stuff maxed out, I'm in a power fantasy and I'm just gaming with my friends and just people from my community, and we're having fun just blasting missions together in a way that we weren't having fun the first 2 or 3 days because the characters felt so weak. But now we're so powerful that we can just replay the missions over and over and have the fun that we imagined we would. And that's despite all of the game's shortcomings. There's a lot of problems with Space Marine 2, and I do think the game needed a few more months to cook. But I always try and make the most out of every game that I play, and I already made a video highlighting all of the serious problems I have with Space Marine 2, and none of those things have changed. But hopefully this helps you enjoy the game more. So that's going to be all for now, and I wish you the best of luck out there.